There is a moment that happens to you every single night and you have never once been awake to witness it. Not last night. Not the night before. Not on any of the roughly 25,000 nights you have already lived through. You were physically present for every one of them. Your body was right there in the bed. And yet the actual instant you crossed from awake into a sleep slipped past without a single witness. Think about how strange that is. You can remember your first kiss. You can remember the smell of a childhood home, a song from a summer 20 years ago, the exact words someone said that hurt you. Your brain is a relentless recording device. It captures thousands of useless details you never asked it to keep. But the one event it performs more reliably than almost anything else, the act of falling asleep, it refuses to record. Every single time. Most explanations stop right here. They tell you the brain simply switches off its memory machinery, and that is why the moment disappears. And that is true, but it is also the least interesting part of the answer because it treats the forgetting as an accident, a glitch, a side effect of the lights going out. I want to argue something very different. I want to argue that this forgetting is not a malfunction at all. It is one of the oldest and most carefully protected features your species ever evolved. The reason you cannot remember falling asleep is not because your brain failed to capture the moment. It is because for hundreds of thousands of years, remembering that moment would have been dangerous, possibly fatal. To understand why, we have to leave the bedroom entirely. We have to go back to a time before beds, before walls, before fire was tamed. Back to when falling asleep was the single most defenseless thing a human being did all day. Because here is the part nobody tells you. The moment you forget every night is not a boring moment. It is the most vulnerable moment of your entire existence, and evolution did something remarkable with it. It did not make that moment safe. It made it invisible, not to the world, but to you. By the end of this, you will never think about closing your eyes the same way again. The gap in your memory is not empty. It is full of an ancient decision your ancestors made for you, a decision written so deep into your biology that you carry it out flawlessly every night without ever knowing it is happening. So let us start with what actually goes dark, and why your brain treats the threshold of sleep so differently from everything else it records. To fall asleep, your brain does not drift. It performs a precise shutdown sequence, and the order of that sequence is the whole secret. All day long, your brain has been quietly poisoning itself with a chemical called adenosine. Every thought, every movement, every flicker of attention burns energy, and adenosine is the ash left behind. It builds up hour after hour, pressing down on the systems that keep you alert. By nightfall, the pressure is enormous. This is the sleep debt you feel as a heaviness behind the eyes. When that pressure crosses a threshold, a tiny cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus flips a switch. It silences the chemicals that hold you awake and hands control over to sleep. But the most important move happens one layer deeper, inside a structure called the thalamus. The thalamus is your brain's gatekeeper. Every sound, every touch, every sensation from the outside world passes through it before reaching the conscious, thinking part of you. When you fall asleep, the thalamus closes that gate. The outside world is still there. The car passing by, the hum of the room, the weight of the blanket, but those messages stop being delivered upstairs. Your cortex goes quiet because it is being starved of input. And here is the detail that matters most. The hippocampus, the structure that turns experience into lasting memory, does not simply keep working with the lights off. It steps out of recording mode entirely and begins a different job, sorting and filing the day that just ended. So in the final minutes of wakefulness, you are conscious inside a brain that has already stopped writing things down. This is where most explanations plant their flag and call it solved. The recorder turns off, therefore no memory. Case closed. But notice what that explanation quietly ignores. The shutdown is not random. It is ordered. The very last system to go offline is the prefrontal cortex, the seat of your sense of self. The part that says, I am here, this is happening to me. The observer is always the last one out of the building, and by the time it leaves, the recording equipment has already been packed away. Think about what that means. Evolution had a choice in how to sequence this. It could have kept the self online longer, let you feel the slide into unconsciousness, let you remember the descent. Instead, the architecture guarantees that the part of you capable of being afraid of falling asleep is escorted offline by a brain that has already stopped saving the footage. That is not an accident of wiring. That is a design that protects you from your own awareness at the exact moment awareness would cost you the most. To see why that protection was worth building, we have to ask a question the neuroscience alone cannot answer. Not how you forget, but why a creature like you would ever need to. Imagine you are a human being 100,000 years ago. The sun is gone. You have no walls, no door, no lock. You are lying on bare ground in the open, and you are about to do the one thing a prey animal should never do. You are about to stop paying attention. For most of our history, sleep was the deadliest gamble of the day. A sleeping human is blind, deaf, slow to wake, and unable to run. To a leopard, a hyena, or a rival band of humans, there is no easier target than a person who has just drifted off. Falling asleep meant surrendering the one defense that kept you alive, your attention in a world that was actively trying to kill you. So how did our ancestors survive a behavior this risky every night for millions of years? Evolution did not make sleep safe. It made sleep clever. The anthropologist David Sampson studied this in detail. Comparing humans to other primates, he found something surprising. Human sleep is shorter and far more efficient than that of our closest relatives. We compressed our rest, packing more deep, restorative sleep into fewer hours, as if biology itself understood that time spent unconscious was time spent exposed. Then there is the sentinel hypothesis. Sampson and his colleagues spent weeks recording the sleep of the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania who still sleep much the way our ancestors did, in groups, outdoors. What they found was striking. Across a group of more than 30 people, there was almost never a single instant when everyone was asleep at the same time. Out of more than 200 hours of observation, the entire group was unconscious together for only about 18 minutes in total. And no one organized this. No one took shifts on purpose. It emerged naturally from the way human sleep is staggered across a lifetime, the old waking early, the young falling asleep late. The group protected itself without anyone deciding to. But the group can only guard the group. It cannot guard the individual at the precise instant they cross the threshold into unconsciousness, the instant their own senses go dark. That final handoff from awake and alert to asleep and helpless had to be solved inside each person's own brain. And this is the moment we have been circling the whole time, the moment you forget every night. It is not a boring blank. It is the single most dangerous transition in the human day, the instant your personal guard leaves his post. The question evolution faced was brutal in its simplicity. How do you get an anxious, intelligent, self-aware animal, an animal smart enough to imagine its own death, to willingly let go of consciousness in a hostile world, night after night without panicking? The answer it found was elegant, and it is the reason you cannot remember a single one of those 25,000 crossings. Here is the elegant answer. Evolution made the descent into sleep impossible to observe, and therefore impossible to fear. Think about what would happen if you could remember falling asleep clearly. If every night you could recall the exact sensation of your awareness dimming, your control slipping, your senses shutting off one by one, you would have, stored in vivid memory, a detailed recording of the moment you become totally defenseless. And a brain built to keep you alive treats that kind of memory the way it treats every other threat. It flags it, it rehearses it, it braces against it. You can watch this exact mechanism misfire in people with insomnia. For many of them, the problem is not a body refusing to rest. It is a mind watching itself try to fall asleep. They monitor the descent. They notice themselves getting drowsy, and the very act of noticing snaps them back awake. The more they try to observe the threshold, the more impossible it becomes to cross. Falling asleep is one of the only meaningful things a human can do only by not trying, only by not watching. Now stretch that across evolutionary time. An ancestor who could vividly remember and anticipate the helplessness of sleep onset would have been an ancestor who dreaded it, who lay awake bracing, who slept less, slept worse, and stayed dangerously exhausted in a world that punished exhaustion with death. Meanwhile, the ancestor whose brain quietly erased the transition felt no dread at all. To them, sleep was not a surrender they had to survive. It was simply a door they walked through and forgot they had opened. That second ancestor slept deeply, recovered fully, woke sharp, and passed on the genes for a brain that protects its owner from the terror of its own most vulnerable moment by refusing to let that moment be remembered. This is the part the standard explanation misses entirely. The forgetting is not the brain failing to record. It is the brain choosing not to, because being able to recall that crossing would have made falling asleep an act of conscious courage, repeated every single night by an animal that did not have the luxury of being brave that often. So your nightly amnesia is not a gap in your story. It is a piece of ancient psychological engineering. Your ancestors could not afford to fear sleep, so evolution removed the raw material that fear feeds on. No memory of the descent means no anticipation of the descent, and no anticipation means no dread. The blank space is doing exactly what it was built to do. And it tells us something profound about how the mind really works. We like to think memory exists to record reality as accurately as possible, but your brain is not a historian. It is a survival machine, and it edits your past in your favor without ever asking permission. It will hide the most consistent event of your entire life from you every single night simply because remembering it would not have helped your ancestors stay alive. The strange part is what happens when this ancient machinery meets the modern world, because the guard never actually went away. You sleep behind a locked door now. There is no leopard, no rival tribe. The most dangerous thing in your bedroom is the charging cable you might trip on, and yet your brain still falls asleep as if the savannah were right outside. The proof is something sleep scientists call the first night effect. And once you understand it, you will recognize it instantly. When you sleep in an unfamiliar place, a hotel, a friend's couch, a new home, you sleep badly the first night. You wake more easily. You feel like you barely rested. Researchers at Brown University looked closely at what the brain actually does on that first night, and what they found was astonishing. One half of your brain stays partly awake. It sleeps more lightly than the other side, and it stays tuned to unexpected sounds, ready to jolt you into alertness. This is the same trick certain animals use. Dolphins and some birds sleep with one hemisphere at a time, one half resting while the other keeps watch. Humans do a softer version of it, but only when we sense we are somewhere new, and therefore somewhere that might not be safe. Your brain still posts a guard. It still does not fully trust the dark. It is running prehistoric security software in a world that no longer requires it. This is where the ancient and the modern collide, and where the lesson becomes personal. The reason so many of us struggle to fall asleep today is not that our biology is broken. It is that our biology is working perfectly for a world that no longer exists. Your ancestors had real threats and a brain tuned to scan for them. You have no leopards, but you have handed that same threat-scanning brain a glowing screen full of arguments, deadlines, unread messages, and infinite reasons to stay alert. The sentinel that evolved to listen for footsteps in the grass now listens for the buzz of a phone. The arousal system that kept your ancestors alive by refusing to relax in danger now refuses to relax because you spent the entire evening feeding it danger in the form of news, conflict, and other people's lives. We did not outgrow the watchful animal that falls asleep one careful step at a time. We simply moved it into a bedroom and handed it 1,000 artificial predators. The insomnia of the modern world is, in large part, a sentinel brain that cannot find the all-clear signal it was built to wait for. And there is a quiet wisdom hidden in this. The ancient cure for the fear of sleep was forgetting, was not watching, was letting go. The modern world has trained us to do the exact opposite, to monitor, to track, to optimize, to stay aware of everything, including our own rest. We try to manage sleep the way we manage a project. But sleep is one of the few human acts that punishes effort and rewards surrender. It always has. The hunter-gatherer lying on bare ground knew this in his body in a way the modern person, surrounded by sleep apps and tracking rings, has almost forgotten. Which brings us back to the gap. The one you cross every night and never see. It turns out to be the wisest thing your brain does. So let us return one last time to the moment you will never remember. You lie down. The adenosine pressure crests. The thalamus quietly closes its gate, and the world outside stops being delivered to you. Your hippocampus stops recording and begins to file. And then, last of all, the part of you that calls itself you steps away from the controls. There is no fear because there is no memory to fear with. There is no anticipation because the brain long ago erased the raw material that anticipation needs. You walk through the door, and the door forgets itself behind you. For most of human history, this was the difference between life and death. Not strength, not speed, not even intelligence, but the ability of an anxious, self-aware animal to lay down its only weapon, its attention, and trust the dark enough to let go. The humans who could do that, who could fall through the threshold without flinching, survived. They are your ancestors. And the reason you cannot remember falling asleep is that you inherited their gift perfectly intact, written so deep that you perform it flawlessly every night without ever knowing it is there. We tend to mourn the gaps in our memory. We treat forgetting as loss. But this particular gap is not a loss. It is a kind of mercy, engineered over millions of years, a deliberate blind spot that lets a creature clever enough to fear its own helplessness rest anyway. Your brain decided long before you were born that there are some moments you are better off not carrying. The moment you become defenseless is one of them. There is something almost tender in that. Every night your own mind protects you from the knowledge of your most vulnerable self. It does not lie to you. It simply lowers the curtain at the exact instant the show would have frightened you, and raises it again in the morning as if nothing had happened. You wake up whole, rested, and unaware that you just survived, once more, the oldest and most dangerous transition your species ever faced. So tonight, when you lie down and feel that heaviness behind your eyes, you might pause for just a second before it takes you. Because you are about to do something extraordinary, something every one of your ancestors did, something a leopard would have killed them for. You are going to surrender your guard, walk willingly into the dark, and trust that you will come back. And then you will forget you ever did it. Not because your brain failed, but because hundreds of thousands of years ago, in a world full of teeth and shadow, the humans who could forget this one thing were the ones who lived to remember everything else. That is the gift inside the gap. You were never meant to witness the moment you fall asleep. You were only ever meant to wake up. And every morning, without fail, you do.